I wish, thank you for the invitation. I'm so sorry I couldn't be there with you in reality as opposed to this virtuality. But anyway, here we are. Greetings from Berkeley. And I'll start thanking again Reuten Revetna and the SSZ for making this possible. You can hear me okay, I hope?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay. So let me start with a summary of the basic nature and contents of the Gathas. The Gathas, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. The Gathas comprise 17 poems by Zarathushtra. These poems form the oldest layer of the Avesta. They were composed somewhere in Central Asia, which is to say east of Iran, circa 1000 BC, or perhaps a couple of centuries earlier, for all we know. And we have no written records from that period. And it's very important to say from the outset that this is an orally composed corpus, composed orally and transmitted orally for many, many centuries before in the Sasanian priesthood, brilliant priests came up with a wonderful phonetic alphabet for the first time in Iran, which has vowels and all sorts of nuances of symbols to transcribe the Avestan as they remember it, and they still remembered many of its details. Okay. Now, these 17 these poems form the oldest layer of the Avesta, which is a collection of texts of varied contents and composed during a centuries-long time range. Now, our 17 Gothic poems are grouped by their meter into 5 Gathas. So we have 17 poems. As I'll say later on, each poem is called a haiti. However, there are 5 Gathas which are grouped by meter. So, properly speaking, we have only 5 Gathas. And by meter, I mean this, okay? Let us take, for example, the number 30 in the Yasna order, I'll explain that, which begins with and maintains throughout it. Each stanza has 3 lines, and each line has 7 syllables and then 9 syllables. So you can hear this. First the 7 and then the 9. Atta wakshya ishanto ye mazdatha yachit widushe. 7 and 9. So too throughout the poem. There are, as I say, a variety of meters. This is just one of the 5 metrical forms in which the Gathas are composed. Now, I have to make a few explanations. I'm going to be referring to the poems by their Yasna numbers. So we have the following Gathas which figure as Yasnas, namely 28 to 34, and then 43 to 51, and then 53. So those are the 17 poems which comprise the Gathas. By Yasna, I mean one of the compositions, and there are many types of compositions, that are recited in the 72 composition sequence, which form the great Yasna liturgy, the great Yasna ceremony. So many of the so-called Yasnas are not Gathas. They're nothing like Gathas. The Gathas are set within this whole sequence of 72 Yasna compositions. Obviously, this is a later matter than the composition of the Gathas. Maybe around 500 BCE was this liturgy put together. It's hard to say, but the point is considerably after the Gathas. I'm going to, as Western scholars tend to do, refer to each Haiti by its Yasna number, although they have their own numbers based on the first line of the poem. Okay, so much for Yasna. Second point, the present sequence of Gathas, namely Yasnas 28 to 34, 43 to 51, and 53, which are metrically arranged, as I said, are not in the original order of composition. Now, one can read into the order a narrative, but that is very arbitrary. And in fact, I can show the evidence is a little complicated. I'll give you some idea of the evidence a little later on, but I can show that the original sequence was quite different than the sequence we have now. What do I mean by the original sequence? I mean the order in which Zarathustra composed the Gathas. So he did not start with 29, 28, continue with 29, go on to 30, etc., etc. In fact, for example, I will show that Yasna 30 was composed after Yasna 32, and that both of those poems, as well as Yasna 28, were composed after Yasna 46. This is an idea we have to get used to. I think it's unusual, but it works by the evidence, and the evidence I will show you a little later on. I don't want to anticipate myself. Finally, the present phonetic form of the Gathas represent a linguistic and recitational status of some centuries after Zarathustra composed them. So, for example, where the present text has for the word for first, let's say, parwim, the original was parwiyam, 3 syllables. And for example, we have a word which is now pronounced urwad, which means to be happy. It can be shown not only by the fact that Vedic Sanskrit has rad, v-r-ad, but by internal evidence that it was originally pronounced rad. And the word which in our text, and this is an important word for later on, is spelled urwazema, was pronounced not in the 3 syllables, urwazema, sorry, 4 syllables, but 2 syllables, razma. And once you make these reconstructions, which follow from Indo-Iranian linguistic considerations, you get the precise number that you need according to the meter. So just the way that we have them now, the poems are not strictly metrical, but we can reconstruct them into their meter. And at times, I will give the poems in a reconstructed form for reasons of the subject matter I'm going to present. This, by the way, is something that is generally agreed upon by Avestinists. There is even a reconstruction of the whole Gothic corpus in this earlier phonetic form, and there is a kind of dictionary, that of Professor Gathas, of the original forms of the Gathas. In detail, one or another word we might be able to debate, but basically the principles are solid and we can reconstruct most of the vocabulary. Okay. Now, having said that, may we have the slide number 2?
Okay, let me bring it up.
Please. Slide number. Go to the beginning. Okay, that's it. That's fine. We don't need. We all know my name. We don't need the first slide. Good. Can you see this slide? Can you read it?
Yes, we can, and we can see
Okay.
you as well.
Good. Okay. You have an advantage over me. Oh, there I am. I see myself. Hi, Martin. Okay. What you see on screen here is a basic consensus. This is what scholars in general agree upon as to the message of the Gathas. If you want to extract a message from the poetic form, this is pretty much the message. It's not necessarily the most interesting thing. The form is very exciting as well, but here we have the message. So we have a Godhead, by which I mean the aspects that constitute God for Zarathustra. Mazda Ahura, which means the wise Lord or the Lord Wisdom, wisdom as the Lord, whose main accompanying aspects are Wahumana and Arsha Wahishta. There are two primordial spirits, one holy, spenta, and productive, the other wicked and destructive, Angra. These irreconcilably opposed spirits choose respectively Asha, which I translate as rightness, and Druj, wrongness. Between these two principles, human beings also choose. So we have here the important idea of human beings endowed with the ability to choose. And for that choice in the afterlife, one gets respectively paradise or hell, which follows a judgment of a bridge which either gets wider or contracts. The bridge of the selector, I translate this, Chinwato Piritu. Finally, evil will be eliminated through a universal trial by fire and molten metal, and the world will be restored to its original pristine splendor. Zarathustra, in the poems, is represented as Mazda's spokesman in revealing these things to mankind. That is the basic idea of the Gathas, the basic concept of the Gathas. There is one more important point which I should add. It has to do with the context of these poems. The social context of these poems was a society in which the poet-priest, that is to say, the priest who also composed poetry in honor of the divinity or divinities, was in a situation of competition with other poet-priests, and the poet needed patrons. This was a system of patronage, And the idea of poet and his patron falls into a institutional gift exchange. This gift exchange is between the patron and the poet, which is exactly the model of hospitality. The patron gives to the poet gives back to the patron. Similarly, in hospitality, a person is a host to a guest, then the guest becomes a host, and they are related by this exchange. Similarly, the worshiper and the god have this exchange relationship. And Zarathustra triangulated this relationship so that he, as spokesman of Ahura Mazda, with whom he had an exchange relationship, also affected for his patrons a relationship with Mazda Ahura. The verb for that relationship is chshneu in the Avesta. That does not mean merely to satisfy, but it means to work within this system of reciprocity. Okay. Yeah, you can project the next screen. Now, there is actually, take away this slide, please, and I'll talk for a little while, and then we'll come back to it. Good. Okay. The second part, or the second lecture of mine, as announced, will be about the intricacies of the composition of the Gathas. And 95% of what I will say is based on my own research. Maybe 94, 96, I don't know. Anyway, most of it. And deals with what we can call a sort of esoteric dimension, a kind of cryptic dimension, a kind of hidden dimension of the poetry. So the poetry has two aspects, the overt aspect and a subtler, more recondite, hidden layer, which consists of all sorts of strategies. So it's a number of different techniques. In the comparative study of early Indo-European poetry, it is known that there, even in the Rig Veda, are certain cryptic strategies. Nothing as subtle, nothing as interesting, in my opinion, as what we find in the Gathas. Just one moment. Okay. Now, the Gathas themselves give indication of this crypticism. This crypticism, I should add, was something that had multiple functions for Zarathustra's close audience. By his close audience, I mean at least his patrons, those people who were his special supporters and followers. The material in its cryptical dimension provided an intellectual engagement for the hearers. They listened carefully, perhaps to successive recitations of the poem, or maybe even successive recitations of the stanza. They knew there was something to get, something to comprehend beyond the mere surface level. what is under the surface level is not in contradiction to the surface level, but illustrates it at an even deeper level. Now, I had a sort of title for the second section of my presentation, in which I said that the Gathas are not primitive ritualism, are not pre-modern rationalism, but are an poetic, ethico-mystical, I would now say not rationalism, but mentalism, because there was an appeal to the mind. That's what I meant by my original word, rationalism. I revised that to mentalism. When I make this distinction, but, I refer to the status of Gothic studies. You have scholars, Professor Scharve, Professor Kellens, Professor Humbach, who stress the ritualism of the Gathas, that the Gathas are really about some kind of ritual. In fact, we don't see the ritual described in the Gathas. I don't know if there is one passage which clearly refers to an actual ritual. And when I spoke of ritual primitivism, for Scharve and for Kellens, and especially for Scharve, for example, it's all about fertility, satisfying the god so that the god puts things in order, so that plants grow, and so forth and so on. So it's a kind of naturalistic ritual that is involved. Professor Scharve even wrote a paper called Smashing Urine, along the theme of this fertility matter. Professor Scharve and Kellens also do not uphold Zarathustra as the real and single composer of the Gathas. In Scharve's last statement, in which he says a lot of interesting and valuable things in the Wiley-Blackwell companion to Zoroastrianism, he says that the Gathas are anonymous. I don't see how they can be anonymous when Zarathustra keeps on referring to himself, and he does so in several poems in the center of the poem. In two poems in the exact center of the poem, he has his name Zarathustra, or at the end of the poem, and so forth and so on. I can't see that anyone would invent a situation in which the invented poet, the mythological ideal poet who is being portrayed by someone whom we don't know, shows himself as being anxious for patronage, and even names who his patrons are. And we know these people. We know Wishtaspa, we know Frau Schaustra, and so forth and so on. Those were his patrons. How could any such situation be invented? I can't see it. On the other hand, whoever the poet was a poet of such genius, of such ethical engagement, of such poetic engagement, of such attainments, that he may as well be Zarathustra. A poet like we see in the Gathas would have become famous, would have attracted patronage, and would have been on the map for his time and through time down to the present day because of those astounding attainments. So much for Zarathustra's authorship. I move from this primitive rationalism. I don't want to spend more time, primitive ritualism. People like to see our ancestors as primitives, by the way, and don't feel comfortable with the fact that 3,000 and more years ago, there were people whose minds could perform amazing feats, more than our minds can, without writing even, certainly without computers. And some people like to think that because these people lived a long time ago and were technologically not up to what we are, that they were primitive. So in parting from this idea of primitivism, I thought I would just say that it's a bit of hubris on our part to demean our ancestors, and especially to demean an outstanding genius like Zarathustra as being a primitive. As for those who see him as a rationalist, I use the term broadly. My own teacher, Henning, Walter Bruno Henning, his disciple, Ilya Gershevich, and others want to see Zarathustra as a rational person, philosophical, rational person. And this is the tradition in which Professor Insler also operates. I must say, with regard to Insler, that his translation of the Gathas, more than those of Humbach, more than those of Kellans and others, at least shows Zarathustra as a person religiously engaged with the divinity, having important things to say, having ethical things to say. So in that way, I agree with the viewpoint of Professor Insler, and I only have the impression that Insler's view is somewhat that of a Protestant reformer. I don't think it goes deeply enough into the nature of the Gathas. And there is the axe that I have to grind. Zarathustra as a poetic mystic. So poetic, yes, we must understand this material as poetry. We must understand that it has a mystical dimension. Something not obvious, something hidden, something for the mind to figure out. And when some of these complex things, I think, were figured out, the effect on the mind of the listener when he got it was profound, made one believe that Zarathustra was the real article as a representative of divinity, and made the person have a kind of recapitulative revelation of what Zarathustra was revealing. And what Zarathustra was revealing was what Zarathustra tells us was revealed to him by Mazda Ahura. So that is what I mean by poetic, ethico-mystical mentalism. Big phrase. Why I think, without getting into details, that there is this esoteric dimension are for the following reasons. Zarathustra himself speaks of hidden utterances in Yasna 48:3. Guzra Senghongho. That doesn't mean profound utterances. It means hidden. Guzra simply means hidden. And the utterances can be words or they can be sounds, and I think they're both. And these are shown as an aspect of Zarathustra's knowingness. Sorry, an aspect, yes, of Zarathustra's knowingness, of Ahura Mazda's knowingness as he reveals these secrets, and ultimately the knowing person who gets it. And I use the word gets it, which is what Yasna 48 uses, Waidemno. Waidemna, the person who gets something. What he gets is the hidden aspect of it. Now, from our study of comparative phenomena, we have literatures in which when the poet is going to depart something that requires thought, there's a sort of formula. The formula is speech to the knowing one, speaking to the understanding one, words for the person who can comprehend. Typically then, I'll speak words for him who can understand. When I say for him, by the way, yes, it's masculine gender, but Zarathustra, if we look at the whole poetry, it's clear that he was not a sexist. That's another story, and I wrote a paper about it. For him, women and men were of equal status as far as patronage goes and as far as ruling power goes and so forth. Okay. I'm going to now give you an example, and I want you to listen as I read this. You'll hear that formula of speech to the knowing one, and you'll also hear something in the sounds that are embedded. This is a very simple strategy that Zarathustra uses. I can find parallels for it in other Indo-European literatures, but it's still interesting. The strategy is to take certain targeted words, take their sounds, redistribute their sounds as parts of other words, and you know that within the overt words, there is the hidden word. So in Yasna 30, stanza 1, Zarathustra says, Atawakshya ishanta yamasdatha hyachit vidushe. I shall now proclaim the things that you should understand or that are to be understood, indeed, for the one who knows or the one who comprehends, O ye seekers. So he's talking to people who are seeking, and he says he's going to proclaim words for the one who understands. And he continues in stanza 2 by saying, Srauta geushai shwahishta. Hear with your ears the best thing, the best things. The best things are the best things of life and the best things of the afterlife. They represent his message. As far as the afterlife goes, many of you, I think, will know the Persian word behisht. Behisht is paradise, but it goes back to this phrase for the best things, wahishta. I will repeat that first line and listen as he says, here are the best things. He doesn't mean merely that he's going to tell you about the best things, but he's going to give the word best things encrypted. Ata wakshya ishanta yamasdatha hyachat vidushay. So even in that opening, Ata wakshya ishanta, he has the word wahishta. He has it at the end of the poem too. And the next poem, which I think is actually the next in the original sequence, Yasna 31, he says, remembering those declarations or rehearsing those declarations, which are words we shall declare. It's unusual for him to say we shall declare. We shall declare, we shall speak rather, words unheard by those who with their own declarations of wrong destroy the world, but are indeed the best things for those who are loyal to Mazda. So he says that what he's going to say is not heard by the evil, but for those who are close to Mazda, they are clear. And the other group are world destroyers. They are the adherents of Druidry. And in that very phrase, words unheard shall we speak forth, agushta wacha sahamahi, you have agushta with ashta, wa cha with the wa, and mahi with the ahi at the end. Put them together, you have wahishta. This he does through a number of poems, and he usually gives you some hint that he's doing it. Now, let me go to another stanza of Yasna 31:17. And here there's another technique that's involved. Namely, the initials of one of his key concepts, which is wahumana, or as the older pronunciation is wahumana, good mind. You remember that Mazda Ahura, the comprehending Lord, and good mind, and best rightness, Arsha Wahishta, or originally Arta Wahishta, form a divine triad. They're all aspects of God. Is God one? Is God several? The answer is yes. And that, I maintain, is part of the mystique of the Gathas. So the message is not that of monotheism per se. You can say, well, there is one God, but for Zarathustra, it's important to understand that one God has several aspects and is still a singularity. And each of those aspects are of the same nature with the other one. That's a mystic doctrine, which I'll show you is embedded in the poetry. So one of the important concepts is wahumana, good mind. Wahumana is both an instrument of revelation and also understanding, and that which tells us the right way to live. So it's a very loaded concept, this good mind. Certainly it illustrates the appeal to the mind just at a simple level, my mentalism, so to speak. So you will hear several phrases with wa-ma, in this case including the overt wahumana. And he says, which one should one believe more? The righteous one or the wrongsome one? Let the knowing one speak to the knowing. Let not the unknowing one prattle. Be for us, O Mazda Ahura, the revealer of good mind. Pradakshta. Okay? So, good mind will be revealed not only in what follows, as to what Zarathustra is asking for, but in the very sounds wa-ma that reoccur. So, Wernawate Mazio, wa-ma. Widwa, Widushay, Mrautu, Mra, Ma, wa-ma, and then at the end, the overt Wahu Mana. Let us look at another stanza with this device, with that kind of words to the knowing, preface, Yasna 51:8. Move me where? Excuse me. No. Okay, so this means I will now speak to the Omazda. For a man should speak to the knowing one. And then he goes on to say that how evil is in store for the wrongsome one, success for the right one, and he who, the poet, the mantra, he who gives mantras is indeed happy, who will speak to the knowing one. So you have the idea of knowing one again and again here. Wachshya Mazda Vidushai Mruyat Vidushai Mrawati. Wuma. So here you have the wuma sounds as a kind of, in musical terms, leitmotif, a leading motif of the poem. Okay, let us look at screen number 1, please. Actually, it's the first real screen. Back. Yes, number 1, please. Okay. Back. There, but number, okay, next one. Okay. Just as an example of the intricacy, this is supreme example, really, of Zarathustra's intricacy. We have Yasna 31, which is my favorite Haiti, my favorite poem of the Gathas. Did I say 31? I meant 32. Let me just got a Nordstrom department store pop up. I tell you, you can't do anything without these commercial things intruding. It's okay. I was distracted by it. All right. Now, you'll notice that family, community, tribe are all named here. In this group, family, community, tribe, Zarathustra is picking up from an earlier poem, Yasna 46, in which he starts by saying that family, community, and tribe, family, tribe, community, have rejected him. By the time he recomposed that poem, some of these poems are composed in 2 stages, namely Yasna 36, he had all his chief patrons in place and was able to speak on behalf of Mazda Ahura, promising rewards for those who are righteous and help him, and punishments for the other side. That's in Yasna 46. Meanwhile, by the time he composed Yasna 31, family, community, tribe, all the social orders wish to be part of Zarathustra's enterprise, or at least so they seem to say. So of him, the family, of him, community with tribe, demons, it seems, also, upon my urging, entreat for the bliss of him, the Lord Mazda. Let us be thy messengers, holding those who are your enemies. Now, in that stanza, the first problem is the word for demons. From the syntax of the word, it seems that demons is a subject of the sentence. That raises a problem. How can demons entreat Mazda for bliss, and likewise that they will be messengers against the enemies of Mazda, when they, being demons, are set against Zarathustra's message and set against the legitimate appropriation of bliss by piety? Rather, they want to grab that bliss by another means. Now, that word for bliss is, in the original pronunciation, vrasma. That very same word, we know, was used by the followers of the Hauma cult, who worshipped a sacred plant beverage called Hauma. And they said that this plant drug gave people vrasma, bliss. Zarathustra doesn't like this cult at all. I think he knew it firsthand and had bad experiences with it in many ways, and thought it was something that deceives people, that misleads people. Bliss is rather something that is gotten through piety. So this bliss is a very charged word in the Gathas. And now the solution to the problem is this. The apparent word for messengers, duta, as in Sanskrit means messengers, also means smoke. And the root dar not only means to hold back, but also to uphold and to hold fast. So there's a double message here. On the part of the righteous, it's, let us be thy messengers, thy, mind you, and that should be a capital T, thy messengers, holding back those who are your enemies. In here we see Ahura Mazda addressed as a singularity, thou, and as a plurality, you, which includes Wahumana and Ashawahishta. So that's already that mystery of 3 in 1 put into the poem. And for those who are really opposed to Mazda, the demons and their followers, Zarathustra's rivals, those who practice false worship and support false worship, Zarathustra shows them as saying, in effect, and intending the following meaning: let's be smoke to thee, upholding those who are your enemies. So you see that double play, that play in meaning is the key to the poem and requires a certain amount of thought. As far as the second stanza goes, Mazda, the Lord, answers them for his dominion. He who is connected with good mind and is the close partner of sunny rightness says, we will choose your aramati, your harmonious thought. She or it will be ours. So he is answering the righteous people, the sincere people. In the symmetrical equivalent of this, if you look at this poem in its first form, Yasna's 1 to 13, as one must, as I shall show you later, as a symmetrical composition, the corresponding stanza will be stanza 12, 32:12, in which he speaks to those who are the evildoers and blames them for their oath of bliss, Urwash Ukti, I read that. And those are the Hauma cultists with their smoky, as the text makes clear, with a further play on the word duta, messenger, and smoke. They're smoky practices because they burn a plant, in Persian the plant called esfand, by the way, which produces a lot of smoke. And this smokiness of the same plant, which in liquid form intoxicates, is the symbol, that smoke, of the obfuscation, of the cloudy thought, of the obscurity of the minds of the evil cultists. Well, that's a mouthful, and I can speak for several days about this poem, but it's time to move on. May we see the next screen? So I've already said that there is a singularity and a plurality in address simultaneously. That second stanza tells us that there are three who are interconnected, namely Mazda Ahura, Wahumana, and Asha, or Asha Wahishta, as is sometimes called. And this divine, now paragraph 3, this divine triadic co-equality is encrypted in the last four words of the first two lines of the poem. Here I've reconstructed them and aligned them so you can see how each word has an echo in the next stanza. Ahya wirzana mat aryamna mnai ahurahya razma mazda ah. And you remember that there was a mystique with the sounds w-m. Here you get a mystique with the representation of the initials of Mazda Ahura, Asha Wahishta, as well as Wahumana, in the kind of interconnected grouping of the initial sounds, of the beginning sound. So awa, wa, ma, and ma, awa, wa, ma. And if you connect them, so you go awa, wa, ma, overlapping with awa, overlapping with wa, ma. So you get overlappingly the three entities, and this represents their theological overlap, that they are, as the text tells us, and as Yasna 28 tells us, if you realize that Yasna 32 looks back on Yasna 28, that they're all of the same nature. They're all Hazausha. They're all of the same inclination, these three. This is complicated. I cannot imagine anything more complicated, but there I believe it is. I can show it in greater detail, but you'll have to believe me for now. So this is an incredible, just about literally incredible, mental feat that Zarathustra was able to come up with. And how many of his patrons got this, I can't say, but I think some did. So the entire poem hints that, tells us that the evil ones will be tied up to hell. And in Yasna 49, the rest of the symbolism here is made clear. Again, you have family, community, clan, but that goes on with the idea of a blissful, from the root vraz, as in vrasma, blissful union of the patrons, in this case Frau Zoroaster, with the divinities. So the doctrine is just as in the state, in the dominion of Mazdahura, Wahumana, Asha Wahishta, are all interconnected, so will the soul of the righteous person in the afterlife be interconnected with the divinities, be united with that divine nature, and share their bliss. Okay, next screen, please. This should be Yasna 45.3. That's a typo up there. I shall speak out about the first things of existence, this mantra which Mazda the knower told me. Whoever do not enact this mantra, just as I think it and say it, woe will be the last thing of their existence. And you see I have put into bold, w. Notice in the middle you get the syllables wah, man. And so you have a sort of sandwich of 4 attestations of w, and within them the syllables wah, man. And the outer part of the sandwich, so to speak, is the word for beginning, or first, the word for end, last, just where we would expect them at the end of the lines, and an echoing of the first line with a sort of sound that emphasizes the idea of the woe of the evildoers in the afterlife. Aibia, should be AI, Aibia, Ahaush, Awat, Ahat, Apamam, echoing the Ahaush, Ahya. So you get, in effect, a picture of the entire role of Wahumana in the scheme of existence. Zarathustra tells us again and again, things were constituted in the beginning, so that in the end, there would be rewards and punishments. And what we see here is what brings them all together is good mind, symbolized by these initials. And it's only in the next stanza that he decrypts the symbolism when he speaks of Mazda as the father of good mind. So I give you a little in the box, a little chart of the construction of this stanza, 3 relative words beginning with ya, 4 times ma, existence first, existence last. So one stanza has a picture of his entire concept of world history as what matters, which is a history really of rightness and wrongness and rewards and punishments for choice between them. Next stanza, please. Now, we've already seen the mahwa standing for manawahu. By the way, manawahu, wahumana, those are equivalents within the text. You find both orders. What about awa? Well, listen to this stanza. Ya artaunai wahishta, waitu wa atwa wurzanya aryamna wa ahura widans wa fashangha gawai athawartahya ahat wahauscha wastrai manaha. So here you see the the ahwa pattern for asha wahishta. Whoever is best for the righteous person through family or as community member or, O Lord, through tribe, who diligently provides for the cow, he will be on the pasture of rightness and good mind. So there you have the wa, the awa, asha wahishta, represented in sound as well as overtly. Now, we already are familiar with Zarathustra's interplay in several poems of the ideas of community, tribe, family, tribe, and community. If ever I say clan, I mean tribe. In Yasna 33, 3, we, this accompanies a mention again of, as indeed we see here, that social triads, family, community, tribe. And when I saw that, I said, okay, where is my vrasma? Because vrasma, or some form of it, should occur with that formula. Okay, I'll tell you a little story now. I said, vrasma should be right here because family, community, tribe are here. I don't see it. I was looking at this in the cafe. A friend walks in and says, hey, you want to see the new James Bond movie? I say, okay. Please come back in 10 minutes. I'm trying to figure something out. I look down at the text and I see Warai Radanti Ahurahya Zaushai Mazda, which forms an oral acrostic. The first sounds of that very phrase, which says, they will achieve the Lord Mazda's desire and be in his favor or his good disposition, which itself is a message of heavenly bliss to come. The first sounds of that, as it were, spell out vrasma. Now, how could, we're not looking at anything originally that is written. There is no writing. It's all mentally represented. How could people hear that? Well, I figured out that it can be chanted in repetition so that you go from the words here to the word for bliss. Something as follows. So he could have chanted it in this way. I chanted it in this way. And one hears by the successive repetitions these sounds. There's a later text, by the way, that said that Zarathustra repeated the Gathas a number of times, repeated each phrase a number of times, each louder than the preceding. So we have later textual evidence for such a practice. And in this word, zausha, favor, we have the same zausha that we have in the word hazausha, meaning having the same inclination or disposition, nature, which characterizes the three entities, referring to the shared quality of the divinity. So here again, you have a hint that the righteous person will be integrated into the Godhead. Next screen, please. I told you before that Yasna 32 has a concentric structure. Here you see two schemes of concentrism. The first gives you the poem as we have it now, stanzas 1 through 16. And then there is a earlier scheme of 13 stanzas minus the stanzas 14, 15, 16, which itself forms a little symmetrical composition, and the whole thing, the overall pattern, is still concentric. So you have two concentrisms within the poem. And you see how in the proto-poem 32:1 to 13, every word has its concentric opposite. So 1 duta, 13 duta. 2 ibio Mazda patim raut, 12 ibio Mazda. And so forth until you get to the center. Every poem shows a concentrism of this sort, sometimes even more complicated. Olga, next screen, please. Okay, and this is just a little shows you how the final bit that he added on itself is a concatenating symmetrical composition. Next screen. Here you see the scheme of Yasna 50. Again, you see the symmetry of the poem, right? 1 and 11 have Isa, and so forth and so on. The middle connects with the beginning and the end, as it almost does. And what you have at the exact center of the poem is the name Zarathushtra, as though everything radiates outward from his name. And the structure of Yasna 28 parallels Yasna 50 in form and overall message, and there too we find Zarathushtra in the direct center of the poem. This understanding the concentrism of the poems, which I apply to the entire corpus, helps us understand the poetry intrinsically and in some ways their relationships to the other poems. Next screen, please. Here, I've taken just 2 poems. I have by now maybe 100 of these charts. I don't know how many charts I have. I keep on making charts, and God willing, I will produce a book all about this phenomenon. How Zarathustra composed the Gothic corpus, how he generated the Gothic corpus, going from the first poem he composed, which I believe is Yasna 29, to the end, which I believe is Yasna 53, and I think I can demonstrate that. And I have some of the flowchart already established. Some details have yet to be worked out. But I told you that Yasna 30 follows Yasna 32 in compositional sequence. Here you see, as you go forward, there's a word in every stanza, at least one word, from the beginning of the poem to the end, going from 32:1 to 32:12, which has its correspondence as Yasna 30. Sometimes you have variations of the word like urwazma and urwaza, both mean bliss. Mash and maza are both forms of maz, and so forth. Sometimes you have the exact same word, but these in effect are the same words in a word family. So here is one chart, then our next chart. Going backwards from Yasna 32:13, which was originally the last stanza of Yasna 32, he generated Yasna 30 going forwards. So he operates in several dimensions. In detail, this is a rather complicated business whereby each successive poem has a trace of the skeleton of what goes before. And the flowchart and the words which interconnect throughout, I've determined indicate not only the order of the poems, but that Zarathustra from the outset knew where he wanted to go, knew what he would say at the end, and I think he wanted to celebrate that by finally marrying off his youngest daughter, Paruchista, and Yasna 53 is a celebration of that marriage, which he had hopes for. I think he knew who the groom would be, but he doesn't name him in that poem. Tradition tells us that it's the Jamaspa. And much of that poem is a final, bitter message for the evildoers. So that idea of reward and punishment is emphasized in this poem. Even though it be a wedding poem, he saw that as a final poetic vehicle for his ideas. As I say, I have charts and charts and charts of this stuff, and it gives us a good idea of how the composition, how the whole corpus was generated. Is there a next slide? Okay. Okay, so there we have in nucleo, in small, the gigantic enterprise of Zarathustra. I hope to have presented his basic ideas, his overt ideas, and shown the ingenious intricacy with which he presented them. Let me summarize by mentioning that this is, as far as I know, the first poet in history who has set forth the distinction between right and wrong and the importance of choosing rightly, of engaging the mind. His ethical dimension, we can see, is exemplified by his railing against illegitimate acquisition of property, cattle and other property, and in Yasna 32, the repetition of the word grahma, about which I've written an article. I can tell you how you can find a PDF of it, if you wish, in which, for him, this false worship, particularly of the Halma cult, but I think of divinities like Mithra and Vayu and others, false worship is a matter of exploitation by priests and by their patrons of the rest of humanity. They are, these evil priests and their patrons are in a collusion, and in the word grahma repeated 3 times toward the end of Yasna 32, he stresses that this is oppression, that these evil individuals oppress humanity through their acquisition of riches and power and their obfuscation of other people. There is the ethical dimension of Zarathustra. I also hope to have given you, even though it's a very complicated matter, and I hope it hasn't been too complicated. I hope you understood much of it, at least. Try to show you the astounding elaboration, intricacy of this poetry. that it's ornate, that it's ornamental, that it's beautifully worded goes beyond saying. But its astounding intellectual appeal, which really has lain dormant for centuries. It wasn't noted in later Zoroastrian literature, as far as I can see, but it took a little imagination and a little insight and familiarity with other phenomena of ancient literature for this to be suggested. I first saw some of the picture in the 1980s, but as far as this business of how the Gathas were generated, strangely enough, impressed as I was by just looking at Yasna 46 and Yasna 32, and you can see that in the proceedings of the Common Oriental Institute for whatever international meeting that was, I think volume of 89. It took me several decades to realize, gosh, the whole corpus is composed in this very curious manner of going stanza by stanza in one direction, building the framework of the next poem, the way an architect takes one building, then in a way duplicates it with putting in similar furniture floor by floor and filling in each floor with different furniture which has some relation to another building, then going backwards and repeating the process and so forth and so on. Took me several generations, several decades to perform the experiments whereby I understood this. So it's subtle stuff, it's complicated stuff, Lord knows, but that's what I think is going on. So you have this really astounding heritage that I think Zoroastrians should be rightly proud of, that they are the heirs, whether or not they're fully aware of it. They are the heirs of this amazing personality and this amazing show of divine revelation. However you see divine revelation, I think his intellect itself is a kind of showing forth of what the human mind can accomplish. And that for me is itself a token, a God-given token of revelation. So that's where I'm going to end my presentation. I don't know how much time we have for the next. What are we doing now, and how long will we do it till? I have to check out at 3 o'clock my time, which is 1 o'clock your time. Okay, we can stop recording. How may we take a little break for a couple of minutes?